How often in film or television does a character get portrayed by another actor? Well, for the James Bond series, it's known for a change every so often and to keep people asking the question, who will be the next person to be James Bond? However, when it came to the first change of actor in character from Sean Connery to George Lazenby to play Bond, people still wanted Sean Connery to play the spy. However, George Lazenby managed to convince the Bond producers that he was up to the job performing a test fight scene. The public wanted Sean Connery back, which they got in Diamonds Are Forever. The film was not much of a success compared to his others. It was Peter Hunt's choice as the director to make George Lazenby's portrayal of Bond more to the original Bond that was known in the novels, with less gadgetry, bringing him back to basics and making more of an emotional character that we don't see in many of the Bond films, with the exception of the love story in Casino Royale between Bond and Vesper. The Bond that Lazenby portrayed was the style of Bond that was in the novel of Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is more of an emotional Bond, but also a Bond that is still able to focus on his mission. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is also the film that is considered to be faithful to the original material of the novel. The Bond films fully matured with this movie. Even in future entries would turn to the reliable formula of gadgetry and spectacle. Although On Her Majesty's Secret Service was routinely dismissed by critics who cited Lazenby as a brave but disappointing successor to Connery, by the intervening years have notably been kinder to both film and its star. Due into no small part to Peter Hunt's inspired direction, On Her Majesty's Secret Service generally ranks among the top films with the fans. It is a brilliant thriller in its own right, justifiably ranks amongst the best Bond films ever made. Although Lazenby's time as Bond was short, it had a lasting impact on the series. Even though Bond had another new appearance in a familiar face of Sean Connery in Diamonds Are Forever, with George Lazenby out of the picture, the producers had been obligated to look again for another leading man. In came Sir Roger Moore, who out of all the 6 actors to portray Bond has done the most James Bond film. He is also known for being the oldest Bond, starting at the age of 45 and retiring at the age of 57. Live and Let Die is a very transitional film in the Bond series. Its main purpose was of course to introduce the new star, which is exactly what it does, and when Live and Let Die was released, people just accepted the change once again of the face of James Bond. It wasn't questioned like it was with Connery switching to Lazenby. Roger Moore chose to establish his own unique interpretation of the role. In doing this, he managed to gather one style of James Bond that they will always link with Roger Moore, and that is the humour of the films, which is largely down to the scripts, but also the way that Moore acts as Bond, which is a more playful Bond, defining what the Bond of the 70s and 80s was going to be like. Moore played a bit more of a serious Bond in his first 3 films, which are his best, and then gradually from Moonraker onwards, the puns were after every fight scene and anywhere they could be fitted in, and basically were used because Moore was getting older and the series was getting more stale. Moore's best film out of the series is The Spy Who Loved Me, released in 1977. As this film has the most suspense and emotion in it, it also does well to connect with the previous films in the series. There is a great difference between the films of the 60s and the 70s, between Connery's and Moore's time as Bond. It may be because the film business was booming overseas, and in the 70s things needed to change within the series and the way Bond was portrayed, as there was a lot of competition. When producer Harry Saltzman left after The Man with the Golden Gun, released in 1974, Cubby Broccoli took his time with the next film, which was The Spy Who Loved Me. It was released in 1977. A few weeks later, George Lucas's blockbuster Star Wars was released and was a bigger hit than people expected.
The Death Star plans are not in the main computer.
Due to the fact that Star Wars was a massive success, and the rise in popularity of science fiction, forced the change from For Your Eyes Only to Moonraker, sending Bond into outer space to give him a science fiction edge. Having brought back the original formula that was absent from some of the previous films, Cubby Broccoli kept Bond in view of the public with the competition of American cinema. The Dirty Harry film series starring Clint Eastwood was also booming as well, having had 3 films released by 1976 and were becoming very popular at their time of release, which meant The Spy Who Loved Me had to be brilliant, or Bond would be beaten by the American icon of Clint Eastwood, who is known for playing the ruthless cop Harry Callahan at the time. The Dirty Harry series is an all-out action flick that has no limit on violence for the time, so it's a perfect competition for Bond. Although the 1970s opened with Hollywood experiencing a financial and artistic depression, the decade became a very high creative point in the US film industry. Restrictions on language, adult content and sexuality and violence had loosened up, and these elements became more widespread. With these restrictions being loosened up, Hollywood were now able to release films that would be classed at the time with extreme violence and sexual content that could be shown in cinemas, which means that action films could be explicit as they wanted. The span of ultra-violent films would go on through Moore's reign as Bond, through the Dirty Harry series into the 80s, with violent films like Scarface, which included intense amount of violence, bad language and sex and drug abuse. Also, the Arnold Schwarzenegger films became very popular with the public, with the films like The Terminator and Commando, which had violence, bad language and a lot of girls, guns and explosions, which the public wanted to see and which the Bond series didn't have that much of at the end of Moore's time as Bond. Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy and A View to a Kill were all successes in their own right. However, it was A View to a Kill where things started to go wrong. A View to a Kill is certainly up to Bondian standards in terms of scope and production value, with impressive cinematography, sets and score. There are also several wonderful performances from Christopher Walken and Grace Jones. Moore's final time as Bond was not the swan song he deserved. The film seemed tired and uninspired. This was a great shame, because For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy had presented a re-energised Bond and strong storylines. There was also inexplicable return to the kind of overt humour and slight gags that alienated audiences in Moonraker. An example of this would be California Girls on the soundtrack, as Bond snow surfs away from his pursuers. It was time again for the face of Bond to change, and as Sir Roger Moore was getting too old to play him, Timothy Dalton was now ready to play Bond after feeling he was too young to play Bond in the earlier films, when he was selected as the original replacement to Sean Connery. This time, the Bond portrayal was more to Ian Fleming's version of Bond, being a lot more serious with less humour. Dalton took the role seriously and immersed himself in reading the Fleming novels to ensure that 007 had a dangerous edge. Dalton's style performance, in fact, is different both from the eyebrow acting of Moore and the brawny physicality of Connery. His Bond is more intense, he moves purposely, only smiles rarely. He played the role straight and also more ruthless. He would also kill if necessary, and was not afraid to disobey orders.
You were supposed to be in Istanbul last night. I'm afraid this unfortunate lighter business has clouded your judgment. You have a job to do. I expect you on a plane this afternoon.
I haven't finished here, sir.
Leave it to the Americans. It's their mess. Let them clear it up.
Sir, they're not going to do anything. I owe it to Leiter. He's put his life on the line for me many times.
Oh, spare me this sentimental rubbish. He knew the risks.
And his wife?
This private vendetta of yours could easily compromise Her Majesty's government. You have an assignment, and I expect you to carry it out objectively and professionally.
Then you have my resignation, sir.
We're not a country club, 007. Effective immediately. Your license to kill is revoked, and I require you to hand over your weapon. Now. I need hardly remind you that you're still bound by the Official Secrets Act.
A farewell to arms.
During Dalton's time as Bond, action movies had peaked at their highest they'd ever been for a long time. Various other action films, such as Die Hard, Lethal Weapon and RoboCop, were all being released around the same time. Action-adventure films and darker films such as 1989's Batman meant that Bond had to go in a slightly different direction for License to Kill. Even though it was a different style of Bond which stood out in the cinema for the time, it also shows that Bond could expand on things instead of sticking to the same old formula for each film. After a 6-year absence, which is the longest to date, the new face of James Bond was Pierce Brosnan, who had been credited as one of the best actors to play Bond since Sean Connery. Many things had changed since Bond's time on screen. The Cold War was finally over, and things had changed, such as MGM, the company who distributes the Bond series, was having disputes with United Artists, which made the production a lot longer for Bond's 17th mission. This let films like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and Terminator 2 Judgment Day take the spotlight in the 6 years of absence.